Hello again, guys. It is Free700. We are back with some Legacy of Kain lore. This will be a second video. The first one was about time and explaining how that works in Legacy of Kain, because it's a very difficult subject for people to understand. Now here's the next subject that's very interesting, because it's not difficult to understand. It's very complicated because there's a lot of stuff about it, but it's at the same time the most important thing in all of Legacy of Kain. Is the center point of the world, which is the Pillars of Nosgoth. So, what the fuck are they? Well, there's 9 of them. There's 9 Pillars of Nosgoth. They more or less look like large obelisks that rise indefinitely to the sky, and they also go bury themselves deep into the planet's core. This is more or less a symbolic gesture of the pillars being both in control of the ground and in control of the heavens. But realistically, this is more true than it is symbolic. It really is grounded into the earth, and it does influence the heavens. It really does. It's not just kind of like a symbol, although it definitely does land that point, how important it is. It most realistically does do that. Now, where would you find the Pillars of Nosgoth? They're kind of centered in the center of Nosgoth's continent, but the interesting thing about it is that many races throughout Nosgoth's history and throughout the time periods, they know what the pillars represent. They know it represents the world, but they have no real idea as to what created it or the real depth of what these pillars can do. Like, what are their meanings? What is it meant for? What the fuck created it? They don't understand that. As far as they know, it's just a symbol of the health of the world. They don't really understand that, hey, this thing has a much deeper and darker secret origin, and it has a much deeper purpose than just saying, hey, on today's weather forecast, the planet's doing healthy. Look at my white marble. Yeah, we're doing great. No, it's much deeper than that. Each pillar itself has a symbol on it. I have it on display here, each symbol. And each symbol stands for the position the pillar stands for. The 9 symbols would be balance, mind, dimension, conflict, nature, death, states, time, and energy. The balance pillar would be the one that's in the center of all the pillars, to indicate that it helps keep the balance of the pillars and the world, more or less. But of course, in order to keep the balance of the world, the pillars have to be balanced, because the pillars are tied to the world. Now, each of the pillars has a guardian. The guardians are powerful fucking wizards with magic that can govern their specific pillar. Like, the death pillar is governed by a necromancer, and the energy pillar is governed by a lightning mage. The way these guardians get appointed, though, is actually by birth, not by merit, not working your way through college and then trying to use your magic that you studied to gain that position. No, this is actually assigned to you at birth. See, the pillars have their own autonomy, and it's very mythical and magical. People don't understand what higher entity is doing it, but the pillar itself selects who the fuck it wants to be its guardian. But it's only at birth, so it has to be a baby. Now, the selection itself is randomized. There doesn't seem to be a pattern to it. There doesn't seem to be some sort of like, oh, people from this city always become the guardian pillar of electricity. No. That never happens. It's always randomized. Now, the fun thing about it is that once the guardian is selected, the guardian is really easy for the other guardians to find, because all the guardians' minds are interconnected to one another. They're all each their own individual identity, but they do feel and know where each other are at all times. It's very interesting, because one guardian in particular, the mind guardian, he feels and can communicate with all the other guardians more than the others, because his whole thing is the mind. So he's able to telepathically communicate. Everyone else, they're not able to do that, but they get a vague feel of everything. Like, if one of them is in the room next door, they can feel it. They can go, oh, I know. There's a guardian right here in this room. Oh, this guardian just died. I can feel it right now. And that's the way the guardians more or less work. It's a very vague sense, unless you're the mind guardian, in which case it's a more nuanced effect. But that's the way the pillars work with the guardians. So you may think, oh, what if I'm born a guardian and no one ever finds me, so I never know? You will know because they will find you. They know how to find you. All the pillars are interconnected. Now, being selected by the pillars, more or less being selected as its host, does give actually powerful magics and immortality to the user. So it's kind of like a mythological parasite. Now, there is no obvious form that you may be selected, although it depends what pillar selects you. Like, for example, most people do not seem to possess magic, but if you are selected by a pillar, you are now able to cast magic to extreme proportions, and the magic you are able to use is magic that strictly ties to that pillar. We've already stated before, death would be necromancy, and there's a few other things like states. The pillar of states is an alchemist. So that would be more or less your thing, is turning iron into liquid. Instead of an iron ingot, it's now iron liquid. Being able to brew up a potion and throw it at somebody's face. Take acid, bitch. That would be more your thing as that guardian. But one of the things too is that it gives immortality to its host. So this way, a guardian could be a guardian till the end of time. The only real way these guardians seem to get replaced is by their deaths. Now, this being the case that guardians are so fucking powerful, many factions of Nosgoth seek these guardians to aid them in their endeavors, as one guardian is extremely powerful. If you have the Guardian of Dimensions on your side, now you have a wizard who's able to summon demons with ease, relative ease, and now your faction can just dominate a fucking city. So, of course, that's what the realistic occurrence would be. Every faction, every king would seek more or less the aid of guardians. But many factions hold no real idea of the dangers they are doing by messing with the Pillars' guardians. Because it is understood that the Pillars represent the health of the world, but it isn't understood as to what the damage the Pillars can outright do if something bad was to occur. So really, the interesting thing about the Pillars is that they're indestructible because of the fact they're due of a magical creation. Their origins is that of a magical nature, so if you try to take a wrecking ball to these things, you're not going to be able to harm it. But due to the powerful magics used to create the Pillars, it makes it hard for any real scholar to understand why the Pillars were even put up in Nosgoth and why they were bounded to the world. This is, of course, due to the extreme power of the magics used to create it. They're so out of proportions powerful that it's very difficult for any peasant scholar to figure out why the fuck they were there. Now, you may think killing a guardian would hurt the Pillars, but that isn't going to work, as the Pillars will instantly select a new host, even if you slay all the guardians at the same time. See, if you take all 9 guardians and you have them all lined up on 9 guillotines and do it all at the same time, you're just going to have 9 new babies born, and all of them are going to be the next guardians. So the real only way so far to hurt the Pillars has been to corrupt it. The guardians that are in charge of the Pillars are intrinsically linked to the Pillars' health itself. But each guardian is linked to his pillar, not all 9. So the only way to really corrupt it would be to use your foul magics to infect their minds, warping their brains. And another possible theory is to torture one and make it where your evil influence seeps into the Guardian's decisions, convincing them that they are, in fact, these evil beings. Reality is the Guardians themselves are pretty much morally neutral when it comes down to it. Like, the Guardian of Death doesn't really care about killing people. But the thing is, though, is that he doesn't view it as an evil thing. But if you're to convince them and torture them and show them that they're terrible, terrible beings, this self-harm would manifest in the pillar. And once the pillar is corrupted, it will turn into this black, nasty rock and develop large cracks along its tower This, of course, is all a symbol of the damage that is now inflicted by the pillar from its guardian. So the only real way to really fix this would be to kill the source of the corruption, which is the guardian. This, of course, is not an easy task. As I said, they're very powerful wizards. But one of the interesting things about it is that killing the guardian doesn't necessarily restore the pillar. You have to do an extra step, which is kill the guardian and take away from their body whatever object or manifestation of being the guardian of a specific pillar, and use that to restore the pillar to its nice white marbly self. Now you may think, what kind of object would this be? Well, usually it's like an amulet, or usually it's a biological change the person has gotten from being appointed as a guardian. The biological change would be something like the Mind Guardian, where since he was blessed with the magics of the mind, his cranium is way bigger than a normal human's. His mind is massive. His head is huge. So if you were to kill him, you'd have to take his head off and put his head against the pillar, in which case his head would just dissolve through magical means, and the black pillar will now turn white again. The interesting thing about this corruption, though, is that if you let a pillar stay corrupted for a long period of time, what's going to happen is the land and the sky is going to start to decay, and the world itself is going to suffer. You see, if the corruption lasts for such a long time, all 9 pillars will fall. Even if it's just one pillar that's corrupted, all 9 of them need to be pure, or none of them are going to stand at all. This is due to the magical effects of it and what its purpose is for, which is a spoiler thing. But right now, we're going to talk about what kind of damage can occur to Nosgoth if these 9 pillars fall. See, giant, lush green forests that you once knew are going to decay rapidly until they're just nothing but deserts with barren trees where there's no leaves, there's no grass, nothing. Giant cracks in the planet's crust are going to develop where there will be massive subterranean cities, as living on the surface is far too fucking deadly. All the soil is going to turn into black as the nutrients and the life will be sucked out of it from the pillars, and any animals that are nearby will mutate into dangerous forms. And any monsters that already exist are going to mutate even further. This means that your skeletons and zombies are going to mutate into weird, gnarly beings that just look absolutely grotesque. Nosgoth, of course, by the end of all this, after many, many years without the pillars, they will be utterly uninhabitable and destroyed. Demons will be able to slip in and out of the world, fuck around with the people who are still left alive miraculously. And all the monsters you see will be few and far between, as even the monsters are not going to really be able to live through this shit. So when you do find one, they're going to be grotesque and disgusting and very, very tough to fight. But there's going to be very few things alive at all. As I said, the world is going to be forever fucked. Now you may think, well, if the pillars go down, we could put them back up, right? Maybe we discover the magics that were putting them in place, right? No, you can't do that. That's the issue with the pillars. Once they are down, they cannot come up. And depending what time periods you're in, you will see the effects and what has become of the pillars after they have fallen. In fact, one vampire uses the throne of his empire as the pillars. He will turn one of the pillars into his throne. And it's more symbolic too, because that pillar just so happens to be his pillar. So right here we're going to cut into some spoilers. If you haven't played the Legacy of Kain series and you really do want to play for yourself and reveal the story to yourself, I would advise turning the video off now. You see, another way of hurting the pillars is by weakening it. See, the one way of weakening the pillars is to actually make its guardians human. Da-na-na. Plot twist. The pillars were actually made by and for vampires. So by having a non-vampire host, the pillar will grow weak, allowing demonic beings to slip in and out. But it will still hold a barrier stopping those beings. It will just be a little weaker. And also the host will not get the maximum powers that they can have. Like the guardians that we see in Blood Omen are powerful, but they are not nearly as powerful as they could have been if they were vampires. The distinction between a human and a vampire is severe enough for the pillars that they cannot gift all their beings to the host if they're a human. As vampires do possess some magic already. Each individual vampire has their own little magical specialty. So, with the pillars being able to utilize that, they're able to bestow even greater gifts onto the host. Humans, though, are not able to receive it, so therefore the pillar would be weakened. This leads us to, what the fuck was the purpose of the pillars then, if it was made by vampires? Well, this is more of a history lesson. The pillars themselves were designed and magically crafted by ancient vampire race, back when the vampires were actually mortals with angelic wings. These pillars were a desperate act and a triumphant win for the vampires as they fought a demonic race known as the Hylden. The war was more or less over a religious matter, as the Hylden didn't believe in the vampire's god, the god of recreation, the god of reincarnation. That was his whole shtick, was the wheel, where birth, life, rebirth after your whole death thing. And that was the whole deal with the vampires, was they believed deeply that their god would just reincarnate them over and over again, that the vampires were the chosen ones of their god. Hylden didn't believe it, so fuck you. Bible time. So with the pillars constructed at really the closing point of the war, where it was starting to get desperate, all of the Hylden race were cast into a demon-like realm where for eternity the Hylden would suffer inside this fiery realm. But the Hylden wouldn't just bend over to this fate. They were themselves casting their own little ritual. And it just so happened the two rituals casted at the same time, where the Hylden cursed the vampire race. They cursed them by causing them to be sterile. They can no longer have children. And giving them a deep bloodlust, an actual hunger for blood, where they have to actually drink it. The worst part of the spell for the vampires was that it made them all immortal. They cannot die of age. This was unbearable for them to handle. After all, it's actually a very poetic fuck you to your arch nemesis. They believe in reincarnation? Fuck them. We're going to make it where they can't die. Curse them. So, being unable to reincarnate, many of the vampire race fell into a depression where they would commit mass suicide just so they can go to their god. Now, with no vampires being born, the pillars themselves, the vampires had no idea what would come next. If they're not able to breed, what would the pillars do? The pillars would be pointless. So all this would have been nothing. The Hylden would have won. But the pillars' magic surprised the vampires. Even the vampires didn't expect this. But the pillars selected humans. Somehow the pillars knew, after all, it does have its own autonomy, it knew that it could select a different species. So it selected the early day humans before they really started to create massive cities and such. The vampires realized that these humans, they can actually transmit their blood to the humans, creating the first modern vampires that we are now more familiar with. But these modern vampires, as of later date, know little of their actual origins, except for a few like Kain and Vorador, being some of the more original vampires. See, as the pillars continue to exist, people forget to realize what the pillars are holding at bay. Because if the Hylden return, demons will just infest the world, and at the same time, if the pillars fall, the Hylden don't really care to come to Nosgoth because the world will literally just crumble and be useless. So it's more of the vampires somewhat won, but at the same time they kind of didn't. As now the world will be forever stuck in this situation where if the pillars fall, the world dies. If the pillars stay, the Hylden can still corrupt the world and still corrupt the vampires and change them. After all, the vampires forgot their history. They forgot what the pillars are even for. So it seems like the victory was kind of a moot point for both sides. More or less what they did was just basically fucked everybody. Mostly the humans. As now their whole fate is tied with this massive decision both sides decide to pull. Besides that, this has been Free 700. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this makes the game a lot easier for you guys to play when you guys play it or read the comics. This will, of course, be more of an educational video rather than a more, say, jabbering on video. Besides that, see you guys next time, and comment down below what you guys think and what you want to see next as far as Legacy of Kain goes. See you guys next time.